Brainwashed 1. Torture, Fiction, and Suppression. A few decades ago, torture was understood to be the kind of thing that only the criminally insane could contemplate. It was regarded as the ultimate nightmare, and the idea of an entire society condoning such an act was unthinkable. What a difference a few years can make. Items such as stun guns, which used to only be found in the most depraved dungeons of the world's worst tyrants, suddenly found their way into the hands of police officers to be used outdoors on the general public. Chemical weapons have been used in the streets by authorities with equal enthusiasm, and somehow people at home have approved this measure as a way of dealing with too many people walking down the street at the same time. What changed? Remember back to 1971, when A Clockwork Orange hit the theaters. The pure evil of harming others was never made more clear than in the series of rapes, assaults, and acts of humiliation perpetrated by the main characters. When captured, they are tortured and brainwashed into being unable to commit such crimes. We are taught, however, that an eye for an eye is no solution, and that free will must come first. The damage to their psyches is undone, despite the fact that they were evil or perhaps deserved it. A wrong must never be answered by a wrong. We were once powerful enough as a society to understand this. Even in the 1980s, this was abundantly clear. I remember with absolute horror a scene on the popular television show Miami Vice, as a principal bad guy put one bullet after another into the legs of a captured agent. The implication was clear. Such an act put one beyond any redemption. In 1987 and 88, with the first two Hellraiser movies, torture was shown as the sole dominion of the devil himself. Suddenly, in 1995, we are asked to become fascinated with torture in the movie Seven. Irony and wit are used not to justify torture outright, but to endear the torturer in question to the audience so that we may identify with them. By the time Saw rolled around in 2004, the audience was fully prepared to consider the torturer's justification for the act in question, and was far less interested in what the victim had to say. However, these perspectives do not restrict themselves to thriller flicks. The popular television show Lost reverses this perspective. The heroes commit the act of torture 3 separate times, and yet the implication in this case is that it was something necessary and reasonable, like, say, murder. Further, the reality of torture is glossed over, as the victims easily recover with no mental scarring, and the gibbering nonsense that, in the real world, usually emits from a torture victim's mouth, never materializes. Is this an attempt by the studios to plant a particular perspective in the minds of the viewers, or is it a reaction to the prevailing attitudes of the day? After all, the argument that if the enemy, whoever they are, use torture, whenever that's happened, we must too. Such unthinkable idiocy would never have been emitted from the lips of a North American a few decades ago. But now this sentiment is voiced regularly. Why? What changed? I mean, beyond the obvious fiction of the war on terror. Perhaps this is simply the natural reaction to the rising tide of zealotry in North America. Everywhere you turn, people are throwing themselves into some form of unhealthy fanaticism. Political partisanship, religion, and most of all patriotism are now demanding complete devotion from their followers. This restricts the participants from thinking or acting as natural instinct dictates. They are never given proper release, nor allowed to see a middle ground. Subconsciously, they are always kept in conflict. It's no coincidence, then, that violence is acceptable in any medium, but sexuality is suppressed. This denial of instinct is inherent across all fanatic structures and has somehow become a normal convention. The result is a build of tension within the zealotry, making the subject of their fanatical devotion seem all the more important, as it is the only allowed source of stimulation of any kind. The thing is, no single source of zealous stimulation can account for a human's natural need, and after a while, a razor blade across the eyeball starts sounding like a really good idea. It's not that torture is a means to an end, but an end in and of itself. An even cursory study of the results of torture show it to be a completely useless form of information gathering. End results, however, are the furthest thing from the minds of torture's supporters. Such is the craving for stimulation of any kind by the fanatics, that the very concept of torture has lost all horror. Torture's pornographic draw has prompted any number of intellectual justifications that boil down to this: if I must suffer, even if it be by my own hand, so must you. From the shores of a newfound sanity, this is Rayer, signing off.